Am I live? Live now. There's the chat. Can you guys hear me? I'm on a new setup. New setup. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. I'm on a new setup. My team's got me on Zoom. Pretty quiet. Uh-oh. My team's got me on Zoom. We're back with the mic. And we've got guests joining us today. So give me a second. Let me get everything in order. Thank you guys for joining. We're past 50. If you can like it, like the video. Like the video. It gets out to more people. We've got David Zell of the Bitcoin Policy Institute joining us. We're going to talk all things strategic reserve from the man that's literally working on it. So I'm very excited. This is going to be a great conversation. I'm trying to figure out how I can get the chat. Ah, ha, ha, ha. No challenge can conquer me. No challenge can conquer me. I'm unconquerable. All right. There we go. I got the chat. I got the video. We are live. We're going to let people continue to trickle in here. We got over 100 folks now. Look at us. So popular. Look at us. I love you too, Matt. Comment, where are you guys dialing in from? I love that. People were in America, out of America, in Canada. Give me a shout on where you guys are dialing in at as we let people trickle in here. I just posted the video, so we're going to let people trickle in before we get started. Let me know where you're dialing in from. New York City, the Big Apple. I was just there. Alabama. I love Kendrick. London. Wow. You got to go to bed, mister. It's getting late. I don't mind it, though. I don't hate it. Washington, Rhode Island, Cali, Zimbabwe. Get the fuck out of here. Are you serious? You shitting me, shithead? Hey, no curse words. Kid show. Got to put the kids to bed. Maryland, Canada, SoCal, Chicago. Where in Chicago? Don't dox yourself, but where in Chicago? I'm in River North. Germany. Okay, this is cool. So we're early enough to catch the Europeans and the Brits. Okay, Northern Idaho. Let's go. We got 138 now watching. Guys, if you can like the video, I don't even know how to tell how many likes it has, but if you can like it, oh, it says it has 0 likes. No way you guys would do that to me. You love me more than that. The more you like it, the more it gets shared. And then, let me scoot the mic back. I'm sorry. And then we'll get started. We'll get started in a few minutes. New Hampshire, Georgia. Amazing. Well, as I say every week, you guys are the best. This is so much fun. I love these lives. It's so much fun. Just hop on the internet and hang out with Bitcoiners every Monday. It is just about the best. This is a ball. Okay. Let me pull up the price. We will get started and we will bring in Sir Dylan and Sir David Zell. We are at, all right, once we cross 200, we're at 199. We need one human to join, and we're going to kick this off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I am your host, Jack. We're going to get started in just a second. We're going to give everyone another 30 seconds to pile in here. As a reminder, we just blasted through 200. Okay, as a reminder, real quick, everybody. Questions. We're going to have guests come in. We're going to have guests leave. You guys write your questions in the chat. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're watching this live stream on a place that doesn't have the chat, join YouTube. Here's how this works. My team is in the YouTube chat right now. They're spying on you guys. They're lurking. The ops are lurking, but they're not ops. They're friends. They're allies. and they're writing every single question that you guys write. They're jotting it down in a document, and I'm going to then answer every single question I can later. So if you guys have questions, if you're curious, you want me to talk about something, you want the guest to talk about something, just write it down. I'm paying someone, literally. I'm literally paying someone to make sure we answer your questions. So you put them in the chat. If you think I'm not paying attention to you, or you think I'm not listening, or I'm not answering your question, none of that's true. I will. I just got to go one at a time. I got to get my thoughts out, and someone else is going to record them, and we're going to do it. This is one big happy family on this live stream. We live with love. We stack sats. We stay humble. And with that, we're going to get the show on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Money Matters podcast. Who sponsors this podcast, you may ask? What is this podcast? Let me tell you something. Nobody sponsors this podcast. In my opinion, this is hardly a podcast. What is this? What are you tuning into? This is myself, Jack Mallers. I've got my dad on here, my best friend Dylan on here. Nobody sponsors this podcast because we want a place on the internet for you to get the truth about Bitcoin. There's no corporate bias. There's no one paying us to say anything, to bias our opinions. I'm not here to sell you a hardware wallet. I'm not here to sell you a custodial solution. I'm here to give you the unbiased, straight up truth from a man who's been in Bitcoin for 12 years. For 12 years. That's why this corner of the internet exists. That's what you're tuning into. And that's what we're about to do. No questions asked. Here's what's on the agenda today. Today, we're going to talk about a little state of the union, what Bitcoin's price is at, what happened over the weekend, what's going on in the world. Then we're going to have David Zell and Dylan join us. David is from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. We're going to spend an hour talking about all things Bitcoin strategic reserve here in the United States. David is in Washington, D.C. on the front lines. We'll be able to answer any questions and get into a really deep, helpful discussion on what is going on in our nation's capital in regards to Bitcoin. After that conversation is over, David and Dylan will depart, and it'll just be you and me, baby. You and me, baby. And we're going to do some live Q&A. We could talk about Saylor. We could talk about anything you guys want. But I am all yours until 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. in Chicago, 5 p.m. if you live out west. I don't know the math off the top of my head if you are in Europe, but it doesn't matter. Okay, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday, November 25th of Thanksgiving week. Bitcoin is currently trading at $94,288.61. It is down from near $100,000 last week. We could not quite break the $100,000 mark, but fear not, my market participants. Let me tell you why. The faster you go up, the faster you come down. That is what we call gravity. Yes, I'm a college dropout. I'm not the most educated, but I'm smart enough to know that a healthy market needs to take its time. And I don't mind this at all. Listen, $100,000 is a round number. Markets love round numbers. That is not a Bitcoin thing. That is just a market fact. Listen, markets are comprised of humans. Humans are comprised of emotions. Humans like round numbers. They both seek them out to the buy side and they seek them out on the sell side. I think Bitcoin's going to have a tough time with the $100,000 mark. It does not surprise me. It could not beat it on its first go around, and I'm not even sure it's going to beat it on its second go around, but I don't mind this at all. I think Bitcoin building a strong base below 100K is meaningful. It's important. I think it's going to make the asset less volatile as it breaks 100K, and it will be our new support going forward. I truly, truly, truly believe that. Another thing, I think that above 100K is nothing but thin air. That's when we're going to enter real price discovery for Bitcoin. I think this is the last psychological resistance barrier for Bitcoin. Once Bitcoin breaks $100,000, I think it is c'est la vie as far as price discovery. It will go up, up, up and away. You're either long or you're not. And what has Dollar Bill said on this podcast over and over and over again? It is get long, get paid. We are living in a world of currency debasement and dollar debasement. All you got to do is not own dollars and you will make money. How do you make the most? You own Bitcoin. You own the best performing asset in human history. It's the best performing because it's the scarcest. Again, college dropout speaking. This isn't rocket science. It's the scarcest, so it goes up the most. You get long, you get paid. Understand? Capiche? Capiche, capiche. Capiche, capiche. And I know, listen, while all of the no-coiners were out scrolling TikTok and watching the NFL, Saylor bought $5 billion worth of Bitcoin over the weekend. And I know we're going to talk about that. Who's selling to Michael Saylor? Who's buying his bonds? How can someone buy $5 billion worth of Bitcoin and the price goes down? The short answer is there are more sellers than buyers, but there is a longer answer and we will get to it. But that's my State of the Union for now as we let people trickle in. We're at over 350 live viewers. If you guys can please like the video, we will get more people viewing, which I think we should because I am going to let our guests on to the show. New setup. Bear with me. Bang. Did that work? Dylan, are you there? He's there and he's muted. There he is. Can we get some words from you, Dylan?
Yo.
There he is. How are you?
Good. How are you?
First appearance on the show since you've been accused of using a painting to flirt with women. No. That's not what I said. That's what the internet said. I didn't say that the internet said that. I didn't say that the internet said that.
I don't think that was me.
Here,
I don't think that was me.
Let me remind you of the accusations because I have the painting right here.
That doesn't sound like me.
No, listen, from the Money Matters faithful, we've been going live the last few weeks. Oh, can you guys not see Dylan? Uh-oh. Uh-oh, Spaghetti-O. Hold on. Dylan got that dog in him.
I think it's just the delay. Maybe.
Oh. Okay. Well, let me know if you guys can see Dylan or if you can't see Dylan. I'm looking in the chat and I will change it. Oh, you saw him. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Fake news. Fake news. CNN. Who said that? It was this painting purchased for 6 Bitcoin many years ago. The internet said you used when flirting with women in our old apartment. I didn't say that. The internet said that.
Unfortunately, I've never seen that painting in my life, so.
Wow. Now that I can say is a lie because wow, Dylan.
I've never once seen that painting in my life.
He joins the podcast and he starts lying. Okay, in all seriousness, Dylan, how are you?
Yeah, good. Happy to be here.
You are Happy New Year?
Happy to be here.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say. Okay, and are you ready to talk about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve?
Let's do it. Nothing I'd rather talk about on this fine Monday.
Yes. Should we let David in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. He's been waiting for like 15 minutes. I've been running my mouth. I'm sure he's... Okay, I think this worked. Look at this legend. I think you're muted, brother.
What's up, boss?
There he is. Sir David Zell. How are you, man?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Where
do you sleep in that? Where do you sleep in that closet?
Don't sleep in this.
Don't sleep.
Sleep in a different room. No, sleep is important. I'm a health maximalist. I'm a steak, eggs, and sleep guy. All right, chat. I've talked about him enough. David is a legend. I'm going to open this up before letting you introduce yourself, David, with a story on how I met you, because I think it's hilarious. Dylan and I, listen to this, chat. Dylan and I were in Indianapolis for the Indy 500. We were racing the Bitcoin car for those that don't know and haven't been around, this was in 2021. An Indy 500 team reached out to me and said, I want to do something with Bitcoin. We end up convincing them to race the Bitcoin car. And we're driving around getting ready to race the Bitcoin car. And a journalist texts me and he's like, yo, I'm a journalist and I want to talk to you on the phone. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And we have the man himself to correct any inconsistencies in the story. And I said, holy shit, a journalist contacted me, Dylan. Should I get on the phone with him? And he said, yeah, of course. Maybe he's asking about the Bitcoin car. And I get a phone call. And it was a kid. And he was like, yo, I really like Bitcoin and I want to play you in chess. And I was like, what? What type of fucking, hey, no, kid show. What type of journalism is this? And it was David. And he was working at Bitcoin Magazine. And he said, I think chess and Bitcoin are very similar. And I said, I do too. And it was a phenomenal phone call. I actually really appreciated his angle. He published the piece. It was a great piece. It was very thoughtful. And then we met and we played a game of chess. We've been friends ever since. David's gone on to start the Bitcoin Policy Institute. He's been monumental, in my opinion, and a legend as far as Bitcoin and its intersection in Washington, D.C. in policy, both the pros and the cons, the advocacy going on in D.C. and defending Bitcoin against what has been Elizabeth Warren and a lot of the attacks. And so I'm honored to have David on the podcast. You are hilarious, a friend, and now a legend, my friend. We really appreciate you joining us, and we're fired up to talk about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve.
Well, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, pretty much no notes. That's exactly how it went down. I think the one omission from that story that's worth noting is it was like one of my first days on the job. I'm like interning at Bitcoin Magazine, and they're like, all right, it's a bull market. We don't have any job. Just write an article about Bitcoin. And so I'm like, all right, well, I'd like been listening into a morning meeting from the Bitcoin conference team, and they kept talking about this Jack guy, like Jack Mallers. No one can get a hold of him. We're not sure if he's coming to the conference. I didn't really know who you were. So I just Googled Jack Mallers because somebody else in the office had said, I've been kicking around this chess idea. This guy Flip was like, oh, Jack Mallers is a great chess player. And I was like, God, everybody keeps talking about this Jack Mallers guy. I'm just going to fucking call him. So I just Googled Jack Mallers' cell phone number. It was like the first result on Google. And the first thing you said to me was actually, you were like, I want to talk about chess, but first, how did you get my number? you were like, first of all, yeah, we're going to talk about chess, but like, hold all of that. Like, how on earth did you get my cell phone number? And so that's the one detail I would add back in there. I think your OPSEC's probably improved since then.
Only slightly, my friend, only slightly. Amazing. Okay. Well, David, like I said, it's an honor to have you on. Let's start from scratch, from basics. We at this podcast try and do fundamentals well and approach Bitcoin from the highest level possible. So who are you? Who is David Zell? How did you get to a point where you're on the front lines of Washington, D.C. and Bitcoin? And what is the Bitcoin Policy Institute?
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I'm David. I run a think tank called the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And our whole sort of vision and our whole work is centered around the idea that Bitcoin is good for the world. In 2021, there were a bunch of regulatory scares, and namely this sort of provision in the tax bill that was sort of a de facto ban on, depending on how you read it, everything from like miners and wallet companies to just like people self-custodying their own Bitcoin and or running a node in their basement. And so I was sort of just watching all of this like play out and trying to understand like why the industry had sort of gotten to this point. Like my view at the time was, oh, there's all these big lobbying companies and like firms, and this is like a nascent but large growing industry. Like surely they've kind of just got this stuff on lock. And that sort of just sent me down a crazy rabbit hole, somewhat of a fractal of the Bitcoin rabbit hole, where I realized that, there was a real white space in the sort of DC advocacy world, which was sort of focused entirely on Bitcoin, which is crazy to me because that's the whole innovation. And yet, sure enough, every time there was a policy decision, there's some roundtable convened, you can't exactly call the CEO of Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a CEO. You can't call the policy director for Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a policy director. But you can do that for every other crypto that's ever been created and done reasonably well. So there's just this huge asymmetry between Bitcoin's like market cap and sort of share of relevance of crypto and this sort of just absent effort that was focused entirely on Bitcoin. So that was like one observation. The other observation was looking more into it. Yeah, I just decided the shortage was not of lobbyists, that there was actually no shortage of people sort of saying the right things about, edit this provision to protect Bitcoin or to protect crypto. What struck me as completely absent was why anybody should care about protecting Bitcoin or care about protecting crypto. So, like, I guess the main thing that I would communicate is we're not a lobbying firm. We are an educational think tank. We're a nonprofit. And my view is that like good regulation for Bitcoin is fundamentally downstream of people believing that this is good for the world. And if you don't have that like enthusiasm, or you don't at least appreciate that there are good arguments for someone having that enthusiasm, it doesn't matter how much you pay your fancy lobbyists. Like if this is just a sort of speculative widget for libertarian tech bros, which is at least certainly at the time was kind of the pervasive view, why should anybody care about sort of treating it well? So that's the whole thesis of BPI is we support nearly 30 academics now from all over the world who write about Bitcoin from their different angle, whether it's human rights or privacy or whether they're economists, philosophers. But that's the through line of everything we do is we have this really strong belief that the emergence and success of Bitcoin is like a real boon for democracy, is a real good a boon for America, and is really good for the world. So we just try to communicate that to anybody that'll listen.
Amazing. Amazing. Where is BPI today? When was it founded? What have you guys been up to? And where are you right now at this very second?
Okay. We started in January 1st of 2022. So we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of BPI. I mean, it was very, you'll appreciate this, like as a startup guy, it was a true startup. Like we had no money, really no idea how to run a think tank. We were just kind of like, somebody should do this. And no one seems to be doing it. So we started off on a shoestring budget. It was me and my college roommate, who was also a Bitcoiner, Grant, and kind of just built it from there. We started recruiting people that we thought kind of had the fiat credentials to be taken seriously by regulators and lawmakers, but who had the sort of cypherpunk credentials to like use that opportunity well and actually sort of say something different and meaningful. So that was sort of the beginning. We were digital for most of our existence. We are opening our physical office in DC this January, so sort of 3-year anniversary of the think tank. We're hiring for a ton of open roles, which I think the application period is still open. If anybody listening wants to come join the front lines in DC, we're hiring for a number of roles. And yeah, so we're scaling pretty significantly. Like I think we're going to have a 9-10 person team when to date we've had a 3-person team basically. So 3xing the organization. I'm currently in the swamp on the border of Alabama and Georgia, not the DC swamp. I'm in like a literal swamp with alligators and stuff, visiting some family for the holidays.
Nice. Well, congrats, man. Starting anything is very difficult, no matter what it is. And I congratulate you on the perseverance and all you've achieved so far. Okay. My interest in this interview probably starts on election day. So I almost want to understand, what was it like to be David on election day? Because I'm guessing, but I would assume going into that day, when you woke up, there were 2 practical options of who was going to be president-elect and run the country that had really competing views on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And when you woke up, was it split in we've got Plan Trump, Plan Kamala, and then as that day progressed, when did you realize not only was Trump going to win, who's very pro-Bitcoin, but win in the manner in which he did, which is not a slight victory, but a mandate from the people to do every single thing he said? So take us through that day. Is that true?
Oh yeah.
I'm curious.
I mean,
Just
yeah,
what it'd be like.
definitely. I'm sort of the consummate planner. So like, it was a real blocker on like strategic planning because, trying to be a Bayesian, recognizing that anything can happen, we were sort of building like dual track 4-year plans for VPI. And it was like sort of what do we do if Harris wins? And then pages and pages of sort of planning and like, objectives. And then, what do we do if Trump wins? And obviously those were two very like radically different game plans. The Harris game plan was essentially a recognition that we're going to have to keep playing defense, that the energy critiques will continue to abound, that we will need to work really hard to uh, to basically make like a sort of strong progressive human rights case for all of this, which we sort of are still doing. But yeah, I mean the biggest split was, are we on the back foot for 4 years and kind of having to like humbly be like, please don't, please give us the time of day, like let us talk to you about Bitcoin, like you may have a few things wrong, to okay, we've got a guy who's president who says he's sort of down to clown. Everything's on the table with respect to Bitcoin. And so we're living in the timeline where, we get to be really creative and think deeply about not just like how do we fend off the sort of attacks, but how do we pass really good policy that positions America well for the sort of trajectory of Bitcoin's growth? And positions Bitcoiners in America well to remain Bitcoiners in America. So that's kind of where we are right now. My intuition was that Trump would win. I had no inclination that it would be a landslide. Like I remember checking the Polymarket odds on a Trump swing state sweep, and I think the last time I had checked them, it was like 20%. So that was probably my sort of de facto proxy for like I thought there was about a 20% chance of a Trump landslide. So that was certainly the bigger surprise of the evening.
So based on your answer, and then Dylan, I'll let you go. I see you got a question, but based on your answer, you seem to validate the two assumptions that the public has, which is one, the Democrats were actively attacking Bitcoin, meaning maybe there was Operation Choke Point. Maybe they were really chopping at the knees. And I know, listen, I'm a CEO in the space, so there's things I know. But for the sake of the conversation and the interview and for the public's interest, you seem to validate that you were going to have to play defense. And we as an industry were going to have to play defense, kind of implying we already were playing defense and they were planning to attack even more. And then conversely, on the Republican Trump side, you seem to be validating that this is not a shtick to get elected. He very much is pro Bitcoin. Everything is actually on the table and you have work to do. It's not that he got elected and all of this goes out the window. Can you say with confidence that both of those are true? And are there any stories or any further validation that we as the public can kind of get a window seat into understanding?
I mean, if anything, I would almost say the more productive thing to highlight would be almost like the counterpoints to those two things. Because I think that narrative was just like so well baked and like more or less accurate in describing reality. But there are some like interesting, sort of nuances, right? Like on the first, I don't think it's quite gotten to the point of just being one party likes Bitcoin and one doesn't. Elizabeth Warren was successful in recruiting like notable Republican members of government to support her legislative efforts against Bitcoin, like the Damble bill that was super infamous, that was essentially like that tax provision that I was, mentioning earlier, but on steroids. She got like a sort of middle line China hawk, like, neocon to sign off on that. Now he eventually got pressured away from it. But there were Republicans that were interested in sort of the Warren camp vision of crypto regulation. And I would say that the caveat on the second, and it's something that I do want to get into more on this podcast, is that like I think being pro crypto and pro Bitcoin is a lot harder in practice than it is in theory. Like you and Brad Garlinghouse do not share views about what Bitcoin is good for, nor do you share views about what's good for Bitcoin, if I had to guess. And so that's kind of the period we're in now, where some of those same structural dynamics that I mentioned earlier, I think are playing out in Trump world, where okay, there's this mandate to be pro crypto, but what does that even mean? Right? Like you ask what stablecoin regulation should look like. Uh, I don't know. Are you the sort of New York based, buttoned up, over compliant firm? Well, then sure, everybody who issues a stablecoin should have a banking license. Like, obviously, if you're the sort of Tether of the world, you're going to have a completely different view. And we've seen that schism like play out in a lot of the policy efforts that have happened around Bitcoin the past few years. Like you look at Fit 21, for example, which, some people were celebrating. I thought that it was, weak on some of the self-custody and permissionless stuff that, as a Bitcoiner, I'm more concerned about. But you also saw, like in that bill, uh, a real battle, if you know what you're looking for, between, I guess I would say, sort of the more legacy financial firms and like large incumbents, like the sort of A16Zs and Coinbases of the world, who are principally interested in the sort of VC stuff, right? Like, how do we invest in these things that are not securities, and how do we like rug people legally? With essentially like the mandate from that camp of like, how do we do these sort of VC backed token drops and not go to jail? It's like, all right, that's your prerogative. Fair enough. What was like noticeably absent though was a lot of the stuff that, I would say broadly, like if you're going to put A16Z and Coinbase, maybe sort of the Bitfinex, like Binance camp, they were sort of losing out, at least in that bill. And while things are different, right, like stuff then had to be negotiated because, you had to get Democrats on board. I think that dynamic is like really showing its head, from the stuff that I'm hearing vis-a-vis Trump. Like there are a million different people proffering very different and often mutually exclusive visions of like what what is the pro crypto policy. Like so we have our work cut out for us. The nice thing is I think there are people like RFK who really did take the orange pill and who kind of get that Bitcoin as a network, as an asset, is just fundamentally different from everything else. I'm not sure how baked in that view is, both across the current members of the transition team and like, you know, there's a lot of personnel that hasn't been decided. Um, so yeah, I think generally that breakdown is correct, with the caveat again that like I think there are some anti-Bitcoin Republicans, there are some pro-Bitcoin Democrats, like Ro Khanna in California is a great example who, yeah, I think his take is basically like Democrats have to learn from this. We can't be anti-crypto. Like there's no reason we should have ceded this to the Republicans at all. This is fairly uncontroversial stuff. We just need to stop attacking this nascent industry, and that's pretty much it. And then on the Trump side, yeah, I think like at this point, to be completely honest, I think the biggest risk is that sort of the shitcoiners run the show. And so I think there's never really been a more important time to hammer home the sort of unique and defining characteristics of Bitcoin and why that warrants kind of a separate analysis.
Yeah, I got a I got a follow-up question just on election night itself. So you're sitting there. I mean, I know for me, I had this rolling TV, so I had one TV on, separate TV on, following different coverage. I was obviously on Twitter on my laptop. I had my girlfriend's laptop next to me. It was a spectacle for me. I was absolutely floored to whatever piece of information I could possibly get. And so I was up all night and I was able to watch Trump's speech when it seemed like, for all intents and purposes, he had won the election. And so I was curious for you, like, what specifically was that night like for you? Were you guys buzzing all over the place on Slack? And then, like, following that up, that he gets elected. It's day one in theory, where you now need to go from the prep that you were doing before into like executing whatever that plan is. And so, like, what does day one look like for you at BPI, knowing that Trump had just gotten elected?
Yeah. So I was actually doing the Bitcoin Magazine live desk that night. So I was LARPing as like a news reporter, which was pretty hilarious. Going back to going back to my intern days. So I was multi-tabbing between like Polymarket, a couple of like GitHub projects that were just sort of aggregating information from various sites. I mean, I was, David Bailey sort of called the live stream and just called the election, like both hilariously early, but also, I think yeah, it was like almost like a tension relief of like none of the MSM sources were calling it. And then you just have David Bailey at Mar-a-Lago with his, his grin and his hat, and he's just like, "We're gonna call it right here. Bitcoin Magazine is calling the election in favor of Donald Trump." And I was doing that with Ben Askren, I didn't really know who he was until I met him. Um, and he was, I got to know him. He's like this UFC guy, who's like super into Bitcoin, which is hilarious. So I was kind of just hanging out with Ben and just chatting about random stuff. I was hanging out with like a random former UFC fighter, LARPing as like a news desk guy. So just like trying to come up with like quick bits to say before it went to a commercial. To the second part of your question, I mean, the biggest thing for me again is like having some, I guess, somewhat of a unique vantage point into all of this. Like, I'm also like a bit of an incessant worrier. So like when everyone's bearish, I tend to be bullish. When everyone's bullish, I tend to be concerned. And I'm going to be honest, like some of my first thoughts like were of concern. Or just like, holy shit, this is going to be such a mess. And everyone, like, if you've been around crypto policy at all, like, you know how much of a knife fight it is. Like, you talk to staffers, I hear this from staffers like all the time. They're like, "Oh my gosh, they're like, yeah, we had a great conversation. Thanks for bringing this professor in. This was great. But I just have to say, I'm so relieved to take a crypto policy meeting that is not like just knife fighting." And yeah, I think one of my initial reactions was, we've got to be really surgical and we've got to be really precise. Like the victory lapping, to me is like, okay, I'll do a victory lap when they let Ross out. I'll do a victory lap when we get an SBR done. I'll do a victory lap at like all of these like stages. But for me, like election night was not a victory at all. It was sort of just like, all right, it's time to get to work. And we got to be really cognizant of the fact that, um, I think like the sort of reductionist view is like, well, Trump's pro Bitcoin. Trump's the president. He's got a mandate. So like, it's all sorted. We're just good now. And I'm just like not sure that's entirely the case. And so, kind of next day was, all right, like, what are the sort of most important things that we think are, I mean, maybe they're controversial to the general public, but for the conversation here, like things that are not controversial to the crypto industry was sort of my bright line. Like, what are the sort of things that we can put in executive orders that Trump can sign on day one of office that are just like common sense things, like pardoning Ross, establishing a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, um, sort of doing something to abate the Department of Justice's sort of attacks on, open source devs. Can we think about like, obviously it's not long term, but like, can we get some sort of executive action around self custody? And then thinking about how to sort of build coalitions of support around these various ideas and just be super surgical on like, hey, do whatever you're going to do, but here are 5 executive orders that are already written for you that have like essentially the unanimous support of this entire industry. So as you're trying to figure out what is and is not pro crypto, you can be really confident that these things are. And here's like a one pager on each of them explaining like why it's in the national interest to do this. So that was a lot of the stuff like the first couple of weeks after the election, like had to become a quick study on like administrative law and like learn how sort of executive orders work, what the president can and can't do. But yeah, I would say like excitement, but also uneasiness was like my principal reaction. It was good to know that this is what's going to happen now. But yeah, to be completely blunt, like I think I was already starting to sort of worry about the next thing for Bitcoin.
For those that may not know, because we're blending a world of Bitcoin and going into politics, what is an executive order? And when you're referencing Trump doing 5 executive order things on behalf of crypto, when would that happen? Right? Like, where are we in him actually taking office? For those that are totally out of the world of politics and may not know some of these terms that you've been using.
Yeah, that's a good question. So an executive order is, I just pulled up the definition on Google because it's going to do a better job than me. Is a declaration by the President of the United States that has the force of law and manages the federal government. But like essentially what an executive order is just sort of the president directing a sort of executive or federal agency to do something or to not do something. Um, they've been around in American politics for a really long time. But it's interesting. I can't remember what university does this, but there's like a website that I found when I was doing all this research that tracked every executive order that every president has ever made. And you talk about a chart that's up and to the right. Uh, it used to be fairly uncommon. Like a president may do a couple of executive orders in their administration. Maybe they'll do, I don't know, 20 or 30 in 4 years. In the last like quarter century, that number has gone into like the thousands. I think part of that is because of just increased polarization and gridlock, right? It's harder to do things with a split Congress. So if you can't pass laws and you're the president and you've promised all of these things, but Congress won't cooperate, executive orders have kind of increasingly become a way for, a president to do that which they want to do with the caveat that it can be sort of rolled back when a new president comes. So we've seen that dynamic play out back and forth over the past few administrations where like, day one of office is basically a bunch of executive orders undoing all the last guy's executive orders. And so this sort of ping pong, like, a bunch of the executive orders are literally just the undo button on all of the previous EOs. See, the other part of the question was, how does it work? And basically the president just signs a piece of paper. It's kind of like the Michael Scott bit of like, I declare bankruptcy. Like the president kind of just declare stuff and can do it. Now, executive orders are of course like subject to challenges. So, a president could be sued because of their executive order. An executive order can very well be unconstitutional. So it's not that the president has carte blanche to do whatever they want, but the president has like sort of broad authority to the president can get pretty creative, and we've seen that sort of creativity increase over the last 20 30 years, and in turn we've seen like the number of executive orders increase drastically as well. So that's kind of the high level take, is like if you're a president and you want to do something, the best way to do it is to marshal Congress to pass a law so that you can sign that law. And that's pretty fixed. It's like somewhat hard to overturn a law. What you settle for is, okay, well, if Congress won't cooperate, I'm going to do this, and at least it will be policy throughout my administration.
Yep, totally. Yeah, I've seen some misunderstandings in that Trump may use executive order to push some of his crypto advocacy or his Bitcoin advocacy, and that was Trump being really aggressive and reaching over the top. And really, executive order has become commonplace for sitting presidents in recent memory. And so I just wanted to clear that up and get those definitions out there so people can follow the conversation. So Trump is going to take office in January. He's going to put some executive orders in place. What, in your opinion, becomes Bitcoin policy? Like, what order of operations do you guys have? What's the most important? What are you working on now? Because of course, we're not going to be able to get 50 things done, maybe over the course of his term, but come January, what do you hope gets put in place and signed into executive order on behalf of Trump's administration?
It's a great question too. I guess it's depending on how you sort of break it down. It's a couple of things. I don't know what's going to happen day one. I don't know if this is going to be day one stuff or day 30 stuff or day 100 stuff. To me, the biggest priority is like Ross Ulbricht, not just for sort of principled reasons, but also for just the sort of pragmatic reason of like, that was the hardest thing that the guy committed to at the conference in Nashville. Like there were a lot of sort of directional statements, but the one thing he was sort of unequivocal on was, I'm going to let that man out of prison on my first day of office. So I'm looking for that, one, because that needs to happen. Like that Len has just been through enough. It's all, everyone sort of agrees, regardless of the normative judgment of what Ross did, that he's been in prison for far too long. But I'm also going to be looking at that because that's a really good bellwether to me of how serious, Trump is on everything. So like if I don't see an executive order or an action to get Ross out of prison on day one, it's going to be cause for concern because frankly, that's like the lowest lift, least controversial, and clearest promise that he made. So that's like I think where it starts. After that, the nice thing about Bitcoin is like we don't really want for much um, politically and regulatorily. Like unlike sort of every other actor in the space whose success and viability is like really contingent on technical changes to regulation or the erection of novel regulatory classifications or bodies to say, well, these things aren't really securities, they're these new things, and we need this new agency to regulate them. And Bitcoin is sorted on that front. Like there's no existential policy risk from current laws. And it's kind of hard to imagine yeah, we just don't have the same set of challenges that other crypto industry players have. So that's nice. So then it kind of becomes, all right, well, what's the wish list? Like, what do we think is really important? I think SBR number one or number two after Ross, not just because I think it would be really good for the national interest, but I also think that incentives matter. And I know this is something you talk about a lot, Jack. I'm sure it's been a subject of a lot of discussion on this conversation on this podcast, but like I think it's difficult to overstate how different you treat Bitcoin when you own it. And so when America has like a Bitcoin position, I'm like, all right, that in and of itself is like a solid line of defense against, really, really bad, like crazy crackpot policy ideas, like ban Bitcoin, which I'm sure Elizabeth Warren would love to do if she could wave her magic wand and do it. It's like a lot harder to ban Bitcoin, for example. Not that I think that's likely, but it's illustrative of the alignment of incentives. So, like, if we have a bag of Bitcoin, I think we're going to understand it better. Like the same way that if you're, a Bitcoin commentator or an academic or any of these people, and you say, well, I've never actually used Lightning, or I've never actually sent a transaction, or yeah, I just have some Bitcoin on Coinbase. Well, it's like your opinion's almost automatically disqualified. It's like, well, how can you understand something you've never used? So, and I think that's true on the individual level, and I think it's true on the nation state level as well, that like actually playing around with or playing with your Bitcoins, as Trump said, is probably like net positive for it's like all policy I think gets better once America has like a meaningful position of Bitcoin. Um, Aside from that, it starts getting a bit more granular. So the two areas that I would identify, one would be sort of the KYC, AML, sort of bank secrecy stuff. And the second would be like taxes. So, on the former, the DOJ is like basically legal theory in the last like two meaningful cases around crypto or Bitcoin was in essence that software that is not maintained or run by anyone, but that just exists in the world that facilitates genuinely peer-to-peer transfers of value without an intermediary. That code is a bank. That code is a financial institution. That code should have all of the same regulatory and compliance burdens as Chase or JP Morgan, which is insane because software cannot report on its users. It cannot like log on to the government website and like fill out a form. It's code. So that's like a clearly unworkable legal theory, but it's the one that's been upon which like really all of the DOJ's arguments in the Samurai Wallet case, for example, like rest. So thinking about like okay, there are clarifications that via executive order would probably be profound, like clarifying that a Lightning service provider, a node runner, a wallet company, that all of these constituent actors that support the Bitcoin ecosystem unless they are taking control of custodying someone's funds and then moving them somewhere else at that individual's, direction, that those entities not be treated as money service businesses or as banks. That's just a crazy way of regulating. Like I said, it's all of that is sort of amounts to de facto bans because it's like Kafka, right? Like we're not banning it. We're just saying that the centralized software that no one's touching just has to go log on to the Treasury website and like fill in these compliance forms. I think that's a high priority. So yeah, I think you could do a couple things in like one executive order, but that would be the thesis is like enshrining the right to self-custody, which I think we already have as sort of de facto right. Like I see a lot of people saying, why don't we have a law that says that, you're allowed to self-custody Bitcoin? It's like, well, that's your God-given right. Like you're an American. Like you have every fundamental right to hold like that. We don't need to debate the legal theory around like the virtue of private property. But I do think signaling on that front that like self-custody is something that we take seriously, that it's like essential to Bitcoin's value proposition. I think statements or executive orders to that effect, would be beneficial, especially because, like a lot of people in the Bitcoin community have pointed out, there is a real scenario where the price of Bitcoin goes up considerably, but it is sort of neutered wholly of any like revolutionary potential. Like that's the world where, you're allowed to own Bitcoin, but not really. Like, you have to go through BlackRock, you have to go through Fidelity. Maybe they'll let this Jack Mallers guy hold your Bitcoin if his lawyers are good enough. Maybe. But like generally speaking, you will be barred from owning Bitcoin directly. You'll have to have some claim to it. Yeah, I think that's like a real potential world. And so I think, and that's also sort of just generally like an area where because some of this stuff gets really nuanced, we're talking about like the Bank Secrecy Act of like 1975. Everybody's focused on the price of Bitcoin. Like, I think it's very important that we draw attention to some of the fundamental things that make Bitcoin Bitcoin and get the president to say, yes, I'm on board with not just this asset going up and to the right, but I'm okay with this network existing and sort of its intended form. And I think that's going to drive a lot of value to the national interest. And then third, yeah, I mean, I do think there are some tax things that could be helpful. Where I draw the line is like, yeah, I don't know. You see this in all these industries, like they get political power, and then it's like, all right, well, how do we kind of get all the carve outs, right? Like, how do we get the special sort of tax because we're friends with so and so, and I don't think Bitcoin needs that. I also don't think that that's like really sort of in line with the ethos of Bitcoin. We're not asking for special treatment. Uh, However, there are some like discrete tax challenges that I think are anti-competitive that do make it harder for companies like yours to compete with the sort of incumbent financial players. And one of those is the capital gains tax on sort of small daily transactions. Like, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this just make their transactions. Maybe they don't talk to their accountant about the liabilities they may or may not be incurring. But it's really difficult to, especially if you have Bitcoin that's like appreciated meaningfully, it's really difficult to actually spend that Bitcoin and not be subject to pretty onerous tax liabilities. So one thing that's been championed for several years now, Senator Lummis out of Wyoming has been a huge proponent of this, is creating some de minimis rule whereby transactions under, say $1,000 or $10,000, it doesn't really matter. The number is arbitrary, but there is some threshold under which Bitcoin transactions do not incur a tax burden. I think that is a policy that could easily be misread as like, oh, the Bitcoiners want, tax carve outs. But no, I think that if we're going to have innovation in the payment space, it's not really reasonable to say that. I mean, how are you going to compete with Venmo or Cash App or anybody if if your users can't really use Bitcoin? Well, I know it's a bit different with Strike, but I think the point sort of stands that if we want to see Bitcoin as this like force that puts pressure on Visa, on MasterCard, um, you know, to me, that's like that tax policy is sort of a means to the end of stronger competition in payments, which just benefits everybody except the existing duopoly.
Wouldn't that just be like the biggest like loophole possible? I don't know. These things are always like there's always a double-edged sword with the tax stuff. But yeah, okay, if you're not taxing Bitcoin transactions that are $1,000 or less, I'm market selling $999 every single time I need some cash, right? Like, or I'll just do that 20, however many times a day it takes me to like liquidate a full Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely like interesting compliance questions there. I think technically, like, there's some law that says that if you try to game the system, that's also breaking the law. I don't know how it would apply in the specific context of a de minimis exemption. But yeah, I think like generally speaking, the one of the risks I think also, and like a reason that we're not sort of supporting a proposal to, for example, eliminate capital gains wholesale on Bitcoin. Uh, One, I think that's just not going to happen. I don't think there's like a really good, like logically coherent argument for why you can make a great argument on why the capital gains tax should be lower. You make a great argument even on why the capital gains tax ought not exist. But saying that it should exist and it should be what it is, except for this one thing where it should be zero, is just not a winning argument. And yeah, I do think that there's some risk of like backlash that like I think how Bitcoiners sort of manage this moment over the next 4 years is actually really important too. Because there will be another like president. That president may not be pro Bitcoin. And so if the sort of retrospective on this administration is well, they were super laissez-faire on crypto. They gave handouts to all the Bitcoin holders, and maybe there's another FTX, right? Maybe somebody else gets like boisterous because they think that the government won't be after them. Then we could really, we have to entertain the possibility that public perception against Bitcoiners is like stronger. And this cycle, it was sort of hilarious because Elizabeth Warren is tweeting like, "I'm building an anti-crypto army." The problem is nobody's really anti-crypto. Like those people barely exist, and if they do, they're mostly just kind of doing that shtick like on the internet. I guess we don't want to give people reasons to hate us. Is maybe the second kind of point that I would make there. It's like I think we want to be like surgical and tactical, and ultimately like reasonable in what we try to do. Again, because I just don't think Bitcoin yearns for that much on the regulatory front.
That's a point I wanted to expand on, is that in your order of operations, you've got freeing Ross, you've got the strategic Bitcoin reserve, you've got tax, like de minimis tax exemption, and what was the fourth one?
The third one was like sort of the self-custody, Bank Secrecy Act, KYC.
KYC stuff. So what's interesting to me there is there's not a lot of, you don't need a framework from the SEC. You don't need new legislation on how to issue your own coin. I think what a lot of people miss, and even Bitcoiners, is that Bitcoin is in a regulatory, like we're safe.
Yeah, we're just a commodity.
We're not a security. Companies like Strike aren't getting sued by the SEC. There isn't a lot of ground level legwork to do to make sure Bitcoin is okay in America. It's how can Bitcoin excel in America? But what I've said often on this podcast is almost the opposite. Like, you need Bitcoin more than Bitcoin needs you. How can America excel by utilizing Bitcoin? And that's what I think is really interesting about your work, and what people are missing is that I think in crypto, there's a lot of folks that are, how can we allow crypto to excel in this country? Because there's been a lot of lawsuits, there's been a lot of attacks, there's been a lot of overregulation. But for Bitcoin, Bitcoin doesn't need any help. America needs Bitcoin. It's how can this country excel by using Bitcoin? And that's the strategic reserve, or that's allowing Bitcoiners to spend their Bitcoin without cap gains tax to provide useful competition to businesses like Visa and MasterCard, which will drive down costs, which will drive up innovation, which will allow smaller business to flourish more, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's interesting. Something that everyone should know is Bitcoin's in a fine spot in DC, in my opinion. I got in an argument with my dad about this of like, I run a Bitcoin company, one of the biggest in the world, and like no one attacks me. And I know that that's a narrative and that people want to think that, but no one ever attacks me. In fact, we're supported. There was a point in time where we struggled to get a bank account, like the choke point, Operation Choke Point, that was real. But outside of that, like the SEC doesn't bother us. The rules are pretty clear. Our customers withdraw tons of Bitcoin to their self custody and they brag about it, and we do it for free. And this is more about making America a better America through what I think is the most American money that's ever been invented. So on that, let's talk about the strategic reserve. I think first of all, real quick, when was this birthed? Like one day we all woke up and our country was considering buying like a massive amount. Was it Lummis and her bill? Did you know before that? When did Trump get on board with Lummis, or is Trump on board but not necessarily endorsing Lummis yet? Can you kind of tell us the quick story of evolution to where we are now, which is like seriously considering buying the equivalent of like gold amount worth of Bitcoin's existing supply?
Yeah, man. First of all, it's just like such an excellent and like refreshing take. I've been saying this the last few weeks. Like, I supported SBR not because I'm a Bitcoiner, but because I am an American. That like the motivation for this policy is look, if I wasn't a patriot, if I sort of had just completely taken the black pill on the United States, then I wouldn't care about an SBR. In fact, like I might lobby against it because I wouldn't want America to stay competitive. I think it's just like an excellent point is that like I think the rallying around the SBR, especially in more sort of technocratic like circles, is oh shit, like this is a chance for America to sort of run its internet playbook back again, right? Like we can be the Bitcoin country. We can be the country where if you're smart, if you're eager, you can build a business. If you are wealthy and want to support innovation, you can invest in businesses. Like the sort of idea that like, oh, well, the Bitcoiners get rich with the SBR, like that sort of misses like that's a real sort of iceberg analogy where like the 10% that you see above the surface is the price of Bitcoin goes up a lot. But the 90% is really all the second order consequences where I think it's really accretive to the US. As far as like where this came from, it's a bit like Bitcoin itself, right? It started off as this meme of like how cool would it be if like, we memed a new money into existence, and then that sort of kickstarted where we are today. I'm trying to remember. I feel like there's a Nakamoto Institute article about strategic reserves of Bitcoin from like a long time ago. Like gosh, I don't remember who wrote it. But I think somebody was talking about like strategic reserves of Bitcoin in like 2014. So I don't think the idea is like new. I think what's new is, the sort of moment for it. Um, Senator Lummis has obviously been like the huge champion of this. She's got some incredible staffers on her team who are real Bitcoiners as well. Yeah, I know that so I work at BPI. I'm an advisor to Bitcoin Magazine. I'm close with everybody there, so I kind of get the what's the word? I get the alpha from the BM
Scoop.
team, and so I do have some inside info. I mean, I know when this all kind of went down, Brandon Green, who is David Bailey's chief of staff at BM, gets this note from Senator Lummis, who's like, all right, hey, I really want to come to the conference. I've got to be at this event in like Jackson Hole. So I'm going to come speak on like industry day. I've got this like crazy legislative idea. Like it's not going to go anywhere. It's mostly just sort of signaling. It's not that big of a deal, but it's a watershed thing. Like I want to propose that America has a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but like let's do it on Thursday because I gotta jet to this lunch on Saturday. And so then the whole scramble becomes, all right, well, if we've got a sitting senator who's announcing that they're going to buy Bitcoin or that they want the government to buy Bitcoin at this conference, like, how do we top that? Oh, well, I guess we could ask the guy who might be president next what he thinks about the US government like buying Bitcoin. Maybe we can get him to endorse the idea. So then there was this whole sort of back and forth. Like we were writing, all of these sort of like mini briefs, these kind of like, sort of steel manning the best arguments against the SBR, basically just trying to like convince the orbit around him that this was like not crackpot, that this was fairly reasonable. Um, and finally, they're like, all right, I don't know if we're going to say anything about buying it, but we are going to talk about the strategic reserve. We're going to endorse at least reconstituting the Bitcoin we already have into a reserve, which is more of sort of a like mimetic thing than anything else. But it also takes the coins out of the hands of the marshals, which is probably better. Anyway, that's freaking huge. Now we've got a guy, not just like a sitting senator who's introducing this bill. We've got a guy who was just the president, who may be the president again. Now he's on board. So then the phone call to Senator Lummis was like, I'm so sorry, but you got to cancel your Saturday lunch plans. Like this has like gone, the bit has gone too far. Now Donald Trump is going to endorse the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and you're going to be moved to like the main stage to do this like kind of in tandem with his presentation. And so, yeah, and I think that sort of marks maybe the watershed moment where like everyone was talking about the SBR. But like, I think, was it Bitstein? I'm just trying to remember. It's not coming to me. I know somebody wrote about an SBR like in 2014. So you had this sort of meme. Then you had a couple of years go by. This one senator gets super orange pilled pretty early. She crafts up this SBR idea, and then everything just accelerates like really. I mean, it really was the gradually and suddenly meme. It was just that's how we got here.
Yeah. So how do we get it passed? Can the SBR be an executive order? Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion out there in the public. Is the expectation that on Trump's first day or first week or first month or first quarter, the United States will buy Bitcoin? Or do we need Congress? Is the proposal from Lummis what we're running with? Do you think that there's room for Trump to take on another proposal, take on something of his own? What's the appetite in DC and from the Trump administration, if you know it at all? And can we use the executive order to just smash by 1 million Bitcoins? Or does Congress have to be involved? Is this a multi-year project, or can the community have some vague expectation of, if Trump wants to buy Bitcoin, he absolutely can legally? Do we know that answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 established the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Basically, I was trying to look at the balance sheet of the ESF before this call. I've actually got it pulled up here. They own a bunch of weird things, but basically the Exchange Stabilization Fund was established in 1934 as part of the Gold Reserve Act. And the idea was to give the president broad discretion to use, I want to make sure I get this right, because the nuance sort of matters, to deal in gold, foreign currencies, securities, and instruments of credit to the end of sort of stabilizing the value of the US dollar. Right now, I don't want to repeat like misinformation. Somebody that I trust, told me that essentially the ESF currently holds like a bunch of really weird like IMF commodity instruments. Like it's all of these sort of like mineral drawing rights, like weird stuff. But basically we've got this sort of slush fund of like, I think it's like 50, 60 billion dollars. It's not really, I mean, it's kind of vestigial. Like this thing's been around for nearly 100 years now, and no one's ever really used it for anything super interesting. What I find interesting is, okay, the government, I don't think the president has the legal authority to outright buy $50 billion worth of Bitcoin. And you could maybe make the argument that, well, they couldn't have thought about Bitcoin when they wrote this. Maybe it's sort of analogous to a foreign currency. Maybe it's, maybe it's analogous enough to gold. I just think you could do an instrument of credit, though. Like, I think that the U.S. government could have an agreement with a large, like so Coinbase probably or BlackRock, and have some credit instrument with a really short maturity date at the end of which the government is paid back in sats. I think that with that sort of little caveat, like noted, that you'd have to be an instrument of credit in which we're paid Bitcoin at the end. I see no reason why the president could not, on day one of office, especially if he has the cooperation of Bessent, who was just sort of confirmed as the Treasury Secretary pick. If Trump and Bessent want to buy Bitcoin on day one, I think they have every means to. Whether or not they will is a separate question. So I guess the first question is this even legal? And the answer to that's a resounding yes, it is legal. Then there's the sort of question of like options, and then there's the question that you got at of, okay, what's the state analysis? Like, what do people think? Where are the key people on this issue? Trump proposed, I think, the most modest version of an SBR, which is we're not going to buy new Bitcoin necessarily, but we are going to direct the marshals to transfer the 200 plus thousand Bitcoin that we currently have to this new thing. And we're going to call it a strategic reserve. And we're going to commit not to sell it. And, it's going to be great. It's going to be a signal that America supports Bitcoin and that we don't just kind of, it's like, when they arrest drug dealers and they steal like their Maseratis or whatever, and they just have them in the impound lot. It's like, we are taking this stuff and saying, no, like, we're not like ashamed. This isn't like civil asset forfeiture. This is, this is a trust fund for like America's future, and we're really proud of it. So I don't want to dismiss the sort of mimetic value of what he proposed, but it is like the lowest lift, kind of least difference from the status quo. Then you kind of go up the escalation ladder, and it's like, all right, well, the president could probably just YOLO the entire ESF into Bitcoin day one if he wanted to. Then there's proposals like the Bitcoin Act, Lummis's bill, which I think are preferable to an executive order, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? I think one of the big risks of having to work through, and one of the challenges of just being in a democracy where we have, it's like an authoritarian country. Like Putin could just decide, like after dinner tonight, that he wants to buy $100 billion worth of Bitcoin, and like, if that doesn't get done immediately, you better pray you're not the guy responsible for, the Russia Coinbase account or whatever. Like, some of our competitor nations can move like quite deftly. We, on the other hand, like, we're a democracy, and we have debates and committee hearings, and legislation is like a slow moving process. So the upside to legislation is like what I mentioned earlier. It's much harder to overturn. It's a bigger deal. It sort of really cements this in the long run. The drawback is it's very hard to do that like quietly or discreetly. We would pretty much have to telegraph to the market like what our intentions are, like well before we actually do them, which could really pose challenges, especially if we commit to an amount of Bitcoin that is Bitcoin denominated rather than dollar denominated. All of a sudden, a $50 billion bet, which like that's the other thing too, is the size that we're talking about. It's like, what's that, 2 fighter jets? Like people act like it's this crazy thing for the government. Like I saw some article from like the Atlantic Council that was like, how dare the government like speculate with all this money? And it's like, wait, you're telling me our max upside is that we pay off the national debt, and our max downside is that we lose the equivalent of 2 F-22s? Like that is the most talk to any investor you've ever met. Like that is the most insane risk-adjusted reward like setup of any trade in the history of trades. That's insane. It gets really different though if our commitment in dollar terms becomes $500 billion instead of 50 billion, or $1 trillion. So the downside of the legislative approach is that it risks getting front run. So I think some like sort of marriage of these two strategies is ideal. that we get the ball rolling with an executive order very quickly. We just set it and forget it. And then we work really hard to get Congress on board and to kind of codify it into law. Because unless we time lock the Bitcoin that the president buys, which is an interesting idea, the next president could presumably just market sell all the Bitcoin that was acquired via, the executive order.
So obviously, from your vantage point, there's a ton of sort of counterparties that we need buy-in for, I think, to get this through in the most effective way in which to get it through. But taking a step back, like, what do you think the hardest part of convincing the public to support this will be? And are there any sort of common misconceptions that you've seen or common takes that you've seen, whether from people in DC or from the general public? Any misconceptions you'd like to address or sort of clear up?
That's a great question. I think the biggest objection to the SBR is that to the uninitiated or underinformed, it just comes off as entirely self-serving, right? Like let's abstract away from crypto and Bitcoin, and let's say that I think Jack will like this, the kind of like the Bitcoin is Beanie Babies critique. Like, let's say that we are just all jazzed up about Beanie Babies, and this other guy on this Zoom call has this like awesome multinational business that allows people to move their Beanie Babies with like incredible ease, and we're all jazzed up about it. And then but like we're Beanie Baby guys. Like most people don't care about Beanie Babies. They're stuffed animals. They're going to work. They have like a family to feed. They have to like pay taxes and they cook dinner and go to the groceries. They don't have time to like care about how much a Princess Diana Beanie Baby is trading for on eBay. So how does that person feel when they turn on their TV at their kitchen table over breakfast and the president of the United States says, "We're going to buy $50 billion worth of Beanie Babies"? Like, your first thought would probably be, "That's crazy." Your second thought would probably be, "I hate the government." Your third thought might be, "These Beanie Baby people are assholes, and they're taking, government money that I paid taxes for, and they're using it to make their Beanie Babies more valuable." So like, that's not unreasonable at all. Like, and so I use that analogy to point out that like in Bitcoin world, it's like so easy to take as sort of a prior that like, again, back to the BPI thesis, that like this thing is good, that it's useful, that it's that it's not a Beanie Baby. But I do think the Beanie Baby thing is like where most criticisms will come from, that this is just self-serving policy to enrich, special interests who helped Trump win the election. My guess is that as this gets more serious, that's sort of the meta angle that I think you're going to see people take. That this is net negative for anyone who does not own Bitcoin. Like that argument may come in a bunch of different forms, but that'll probably be the through line. And then you've got a bunch of other arguments people might make of, oh, is this picking Bitcoin over Ethereum? But to me, that's like the best argument against it, and where I expect like most of the criticism to come from.
Where is that the core work to be done? Said differently, if this doesn't happen, why? Would it be because we don't have the legal and policy expertise to draft the right bills and get it passed through Congress? Is it because the public wasn't supportive enough and educated enough for Trump to feel comfortable? What is the core work that's the difference between America being better as Bitcoiners and paying off its debt and being pro-growth and pro-technology versus an America that's going to be left behind?
That's a really interesting way of framing the problem. I don't know how I would sort of stack up and quantify and compare like all the different ways this could get gummed up. But I do think that the most important thing, hands down right now, is honestly, the person to convince is Scott Bessent. Like, and that's, it's a paper we're working on at BPI. We'll be putting this out soon, and hopefully we're able to get it to him, because it's essentially just the Bitcoin version of the economic plan for America that he's outlined, which I think even though it doesn't really mention Bitcoin, like you can kind of tell he sees where we're coming from. And I think we're rowing in like similar directions. So uh yeah, I mean, I think that the first layer is let's make sure the critical decision makers are on board. If I'm Scott Bessent, my main concern is going to be, does this spook investors? Does this make other countries' central banks you know, wary of our promise? Like, again, this is the Money Matters podcast. Like, I know you've probably talked about this a bunch before. I think most people don't. Well, one of the big things I've realized when talking about the SBR at like the kitchen table or like out with friends is most people don't seem to appreciate how we've radically transformed the monetary system like multiple times in the last century. That's just lost on people. And so uh, we have like in crazy ways just completely overnight like rugged the global financial system and said, you know what, this stuff that's not really gold anymore, sorry Europe, like nobody told you, like we're suspending this convertibility of the dollar into gold, like have fun with that. So I think like there's the sort of technocratic concern that okay, could this signal an intention to do that playbook again, to completely flip the monetary system and get ourselves out of all of these debt obligations. Because that's Bessent's like main job. And frankly, that's kind of, if you're running the United States of America, that's kind of has to be your principal objective, given the system that we have, is like you have to be uh, uh, creating a present and rallying people around a future that inspires confidence in our ability to pay back our debt. Because the U.S. Treasury security is the gasoline that makes this whole thing work. So yeah, I think that's actually maybe the first layer. If Trump and Bessent and those key advisors are on board, um, you know, I don't really know what stands in the way of the president doing this. Like, I think that there are, broadly speaking, like you have to imagine there will be people for whom the president respects their opinion that may be in the room while this is being discussed that may have, a bajillion arguments about why the SBR is bad. And so I guess that's the other risk, is that, people just talk him out of it, basically. Like if Trump wants to do it, but people in his circle say, this is a step too far, it's too risky, blah, 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 A16Z will hate us forever because we're not making a strategic reserve of whatever their latest like venture investment was. Yeah, I guess he could get talked out of it. So I think like to me, that's where I'm focused, is like what are the sort of serious buttoned up technocratic arguments that somebody can make against the SBR, and how do we either, how do we either sort of disprove those arguments or, outweigh them and basically just double down on the benefit of you could concede a bunch of sort of drawbacks of the SBR so long as the net benefits like clearly outweigh them. So kind of a combination of rebuttals and weighing benefits versus costs. The hope is to just have like people in that room who are SBR advocates, who are armed with the best arguments, basically, and that the idea kind of remains unscathed, as I'm sure people close to Trump take pot shots at it. I would sort of stop there, and then I would say like all the other risks to the SBR are like much more difficult to map out. Like there's the fundamental challenge of getting 60 votes in the Senate, for example. Like, but yeah, I think where we are now is if a small group of people in the United States government want to smash buy Bitcoin on day one of this incoming administration, not a lot stopping them other than themselves, like talking themselves out of it.
Are you aware of any plans in place to educate the general public on what a strategic national Bitcoin reserve would mean? Just because I imagine carrying your sort of Beanie Baby example forward, I would imagine the average American is probably outside of the crypto ecosystem looks at this, maybe at best with skepticism, or at least some degree of skepticism. And I'm just curious. Have you heard of any plans around any sort of educational awareness information? Is there a unitedstates.gov/Bitcoin I could go to learn more about why this would be important?
I would say not yet on the government website piece. We're certainly trying to educate people. Our focus has been on it sounds kind of hilarious, but from our vantage point, there's maybe 15 people that need to be really bought into this idea for it to kind of hit escape velocity. So I would say the stuff that we're putting out is kind of super narrowly targeted at that core constituency. I'm not aware of any sort of broad, because I think what you're talking about is almost more like you know, a media campaign to say, hey, I know this sounds crazy. Here's why we're doing it. My hope would be that that would come from the US government itself,
Right.
and would come from the office of the president. If they're going to sign an executive order to smash buy Bitcoin, um, I think that'll be the job of the press team of the White House to sort of lay out why this is in the national interest, why we're doing it. Um, yeah, I guess that's the other point too, is I guess there's also a risk that if public backlash is high enough that it may spook Trump. And I think it's been eerily, I mean, there have been some, um, but for all that has sort of dominated the headline bullishness that it's promoted among people, I feel like there's been a real shortage of anti-SBR takes and hit pieces. My instinct is that is not because people are not anti-SBR, but is instead because people just think this is still in the realm of just nonsense.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think it's a great point, Dylan. I do think that if this is going to have legs, then yeah, a sort of public education campaign about why we're doing it will be really, really important. Because yeah, I do think that the average American risks sort of misreading what this is, which is and the way I see it is it's a trust fund, right? It's a trust fund for everybody in America. It doesn't matter whether you come from money or you're rich, you're poor, you're an immigrant. It doesn't matter. If you are a U.S. citizen here in this country, you and your children and their children will benefit from this purchase. So I guess that has to sort of be the framing. I'm not aware of a widespread sort of media effort to massage the idea. I think I'm kind of focused one layer up from that, which is
Right.
how do we convince the sort of nerds with the pens to say yes?
That's the most fascinating part about Bitcoin is we don't have a policy team or a CEO. All the messaging comes in a distributed manner. We try to do our best on this podcast or on Bloomberg or something. You try and do your best. There's anonymous Twitter accounts that are somehow very valuable in the conversation. Okay, I'm going to take that and parlay it into the last question, which is an unfair one, but I give the people what they want, which is what are the odds, David? That's what everyone wants to know. And I agree with you. There's not a lot of anti-rhetoric because I think people don't know how serious to even take this. It sounds so preposterous to some, but there are also people that are so convicted that it's already going to happen. If you follow David Bailey, you might as well cash your check. And then I think the prediction markets literally have it at a split 50-50. The prediction markets seem to be somewhere in the middle. I think there's one side that's 0% chance. I'm not even going to waste my time writing an article on why this is dumb. And then you've got the CEO of Bitcoin media companies that are like, cash your check. We're buying the most amount of Bitcoin in the world. So we're going to buy 22 million Bitcoin, even though it doesn't exist. So I know it's an unfair question, but the last one we got for you is
What are the odds? Okay, let's be clear. Let's be clear about what we're talking about. What are the odds of America declaring that we have a strategic reserve, pulling the Michael Scott? That's got to be north of 90%, north of 95%. the interesting question, the one I suspect you're asking about, is like the purchase of, you know, a million Bitcoin or fewer, but you know, it's kind of a massive purchase. Oh, dude, I am so like bad at putting numbers to things. I mean, my instinct is almost just to say 25%, which is in the most like unsophisticated way possible, which is first, there's like a 50-50 chance that, you know, when like it's all said and done, that this is the intent of the president, and it was like the strong desire of Trump to do it. So we give that 50-50. And then, you know, the second hurdle is, you know, is it uh, is it challenged in the courts? Is it gummed up in some way? Is there some massive, you know, public backlash that causes like reconsideration? Um, and I would just say 50, I would say two 50-50s. We got to win like two coin tosses, basically. So I would just say 25% would be my odds of, which I actually think like, well, probably, I guess, to your description, half the odds that Polymarket is ascribing to it. Um, when you take a step back and realize like the grandiosity of what we're talking about, a 25% chance of the US government buying a million Bitcoin is unreal. Like that is so high. Um, so like I don't mean to be bearish on the idea, but yeah, I would say like I think we have a comfortable 1 in 4 chance of the US government buying a significant amount of Bitcoin. I will update. I'll make a deal with you. I will update these probabilities and give you a better one once some big personnel decisions have been made. Because like people say that all the time, and it's true. Like personnel is policy. Policy is personnel, and so there are a lot of people in the Trump orbit right now. I think this is answering a question that I missed from earlier, who are supportive of Bitcoin, but none of them have crypto roles. Like they're all going to be like RFK loves this idea and he's championing it, you know, as a member of this transition team, but he's got to run the NHS. And so, or sorry, HHS. And so, or whatever his department is. So yeah, I think what I'm waiting for, like sort of the chips to fall, like, you know, who are the sort of individual human beings that will be tasked with and could either speed up or really slow down SBR efforts to kind of give you a better probability. Like that's what I would sort of wait on.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, we'll take you up on that and have you back on the show once we have a better understanding. And we're only like 2 months away, man,
I
from Trump
know.
taking office and starting to make policy changes. Well, David, we appreciate it. Where can everyone watching and listening find you? How can we support you? What do you want people to know as we end up or as we wrap up here? Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, so again, we're the Bitcoin Policy Institute. You can find us at www.btcpolicy.org. btcpolicy.org. You can also Google Bitcoin Policy Institute. Yeah, I mean, I think the message to anybody interested in sort of this work at like the intersection of Bitcoin and sort of policy advocacy, uh, yeah, you should get involved. Like I mentioned at the start of this call, we're hiring for several open positions. Like, humbly, I think these are kind of like unicorn jobs. Like there aren't many ways that you can just reliably get paid to write about Bitcoin and think deeply about Bitcoin. So if you're the kind of person who loves to do those things, maybe you already do them, and the notion of getting a paycheck to do those things is attractive to you, I would strongly consider applying to work with us at the think tank. Um, and yeah, other than that, like, you know, elevate our work on social media when you see it. We've got, you know, an incredible sort of cohort of really interesting thinkers about Bitcoin. And so yeah, I would just say like engage with our work, follow our authors, and yeah, you know, consider working with us if you're so inclined.
Love it, buddy. All right. Well, you know, I'm your biggest fan. Keep up the good work. We got a lot of work to do. And
We do.
yeah, I see the chat giving you applause and hearts. And we'll talk to you. We'll have you back on maybe in a month or two to check back in and get we gotta get that 25% number up. No pressure though, no pressure.
We'll see. Well, thanks so much for having me, Jack. Thank you, Dylan. This was a blast.
David, a lot of the work that you do is very behind the scenes. A lot of the work that BPI does is very behind the scenes. But as a shareholder of Bitcoin, hey, own a little bit of it. I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the work that you're doing for Bitcoin. It benefits us all. And yeah, thank you, man.
Likewise to you guys. Y'all take care.
Be easy.
Bye.
All right, chat. What did you think of that? We still got about half hour to do some Q&A, but what did you think about David and the Bitcoin Policy Institute? David's great. I'm a huge fan of David, and there are real humans on the ground writing policy, writing education that are pushing a lot of this forward. And so I'm glad that we got access to David and got to ask him some questions to kind of sift through a lot of the noise. There's a lot of noise on the internet. And noise, as entertaining as it is not always useful, chat. It's not always useful. Okay, we still got over 400 of you guys, I think. New setup, around that number. Seemed like a nice kid. He is a nice kid. If you can, like the show, and we're gonna end with some Q&A. And I still got Dylan here. Dylan's just hanging around. Little Dill,
Yeah,
Sly Guy Dill. He's always sitting in the corner.
I figured I'd watch the Q&A anyway, so I'm going to stick around and just hear what you have to say. Maybe chime in a little bit.
Sly Guy Dill. Never count him out. Sly Guy Dill.
Still doesn't ring a bell.
What is that? A $500,000 painting? All right, here's what we're going to do. I've got a list of questions from Lavinia. Shout out Lavinia. She's the one spying in the chat. She's like this, lurking. Shh. Who's asking a question? She's taking all of your questions. She's written them down. And we are going to go, oh my God, we've got about half hour, maybe a little less, and we have like 100 questions. Are you guys ready to rumble? Because I got to go. Ready, Dill?
Let's do it.
Sly Guy Dill. Question 1. Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, how does that work? I feel like we should skip the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve questions. No, or we should answer them because we're fresh off the episode.
I feel like we just did about an hour and a half of that.
Okay, we're over it. We're going to MSTR and Saylor. Jack, what do you make of Saylor's convertible bond move? Can you explain it to a fourth grader? Okay, 2 separate questions. The first, what do I think of it? I say the same answer every single time, guys. I think it's genius. Why do I think it's genius? It's because Saylor gets to borrow money that only goes down to buy money that only goes up. That is a good trade. That is a good trade. Everyone in the world should do that. I do that. Saylor does it at a much higher scale than me. So what do I think of it? I think it's genius. How would I explain it to a fourth grader? I would say to a fourth grader, there are 2 things you can own. One of the things only goes down in value. One of the things only goes up in value. Which of the 2 do you want to own? And I would expect the fourth grader to say, I would want to own the thing that goes up, not down. And then I would say, good, that's correct. How much of the thing would you want to own that only goes up? And I would expect the fourth grader to say, as much as I can. And I would say, you're hired. You're Michael Saylor. Because that's all he's doing. That's all he's doing. He's just owning as much Bitcoin as he can. So what he does is he issues these instruments and he lets the public buy these Bitcoin-backed bonds. And as much as he's able to sell, he takes and he converts it into Bitcoin. So I think it's genius. And I think it's so simple and so eloquent that even a fourth grader could do it. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. How can I set this up in a way where I can see the chat and these questions? Okay, next question. What do you think Saylor bought? Why do you think Saylor bought over the weekend? Didn't the release say he bought over the past week? I assume that means his buys were spread out. Oh, I don't know. I was just kidding. I was just making fun of people that you were sitting on your couch on TikTok over the weekend and Saylor was buying $5 billion worth of Bitcoin. It was just a joke. I don't actually know when Saylor bought. I assume that he doesn't have much discretion. I don't think Saylor is sitting on his couch speculating and watching charts. I assume he gets the money. Once he has the money, he buys the Bitcoin. These Bitcoin purchases are done professionally. They're not done in one giant smash buy. He gapped the market pretty significantly. He probably has an OTC firm, and that desk is able to execute his order without the most slippage. That's what he wants. He wants a calm price. He does not want to move the market. So it probably takes time at that size. I think these are the biggest Bitcoin purchases in the history of Bitcoin. I mean, we don't actually know, but at least for public company or public purchases, I think that's true. So I have no idea when he did it. I was just making a joke. Kids these days, as someone in the chat said, Crypto Clay, kids these days. Yo, Jack, MSTR, Ponzi, or hyper Bitcoinization? I do not think MicroStrategy is a Ponzi. I do not think that. I think that owning Bitcoin is legit. Obviously, I think that's not a Ponzi. I'm a fan of it. And I think his operating company is performant at doing that. Think about it that way. How much is it worth to be really good, arguably the best in the world, at buying the best performing thing in human history? Probably really valuable, right? I think Saylor's business, MicroStrategy, has a proven track record of being really good at acquiring Bitcoin for its shareholders. And Bitcoin has a proven track record of going up a lot. What? I don't know what makes that a Ponzi. Listen, is there risk? Absolutely. I've said it before. Do I own MSTR? No, I don't. No bueno on risk for me. I'm cool on that. I'm at a point in my life where it's just me and the sats. It's me and the coins. We sit ice cold in the freezer. That's how I do it. So there's risk. There's leverage. Things can go wrong. Does that make it a Ponzi? No, not at all. His business is owning Bitcoin and acquiring Bitcoin, and he's really good at it. He even came up with his own KPIs like BTC yield to show you and explain it like a fourth grader. Jack, how much Ripple do you own? Get the fuck out of here. Kid show. I don't know any Ripple. Enough with stupid questions. Last MSTR question. Do you think if the MicroStrategy premium goes negative, they can have some of the cascading effects that Grayscale Bitcoin Trust did? If I think the MicroStrategy premium goes negative, maybe. Well, not necessarily. Not like the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. The interesting thing about the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust is it was not as liquid as MicroStrategy. That was the problem. It's not as liquid as the MicroStrategy. And the arbitrage trade was a lot different. Now Saylor's trading at this NAV premium. His argument is it's valuing the operating company. They're a growth company. So my simple answer to that question is no. And we're going to move on because there's a ton more questions. But I would say no, MicroStrategy is very different than the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust in a variety of ways. Fair enough. And Dylan wants to leave. Announcement. This guy.
I'm out this jam. See y'all next week.
Thanks for joining. See ya. This guy. Chief of staff, huh? Kidding. The best in the business, that Dylan Lieteau. The best in the business. Okay. Bitcoin forecasts and markets questions. We ready? This is rapid fire. And give me feedback, chat. If you guys want me to slow down, if you want me to change topics, I got the chat. But I'm going to keep going because I told you guys I'd answer your questions, and I'm a man of my word, man of the people. The people said that. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. The people said that. They said, that guy's a man of the people. I didn't say that. The people said that. Why isn't the price going up even though Saylor bought $5 billion worth of Bitcoin? Who's selling right now? That is a good question. Now, listen, people ask me all the time, Jack, why does the Bitcoin price go down? Well, it's very simple. The Bitcoin price goes down when more people are selling than buying. The Bitcoin price goes up when more people are buying than selling. That is a joke, but it's the truth. That's what a market is, especially a free one. Bitcoin's the most free market in the world. It's a return to first principle thinking. It's a back to the basics. Bitcoin goes down when more people want to sell it than buy it. That's what happened this weekend. That's what happened today. Now, why would these people want to sell? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But if you're asking me to guess, here's my best guess. Let me give you guys some quick alpha, some quick expert insight and expertise. There's been 4 Bitcoin halvings in the history of Bitcoin. Your boy, aka me, aka Jack Mallers, has been in 3 of them. 3 of them. So I've been around a long time. Let me tell you something. This is what always happens. When Bitcoin goes through a halving, that means the new supply of Bitcoin is cut in half. That means the mining reward, the reward miners get for producing new Bitcoins and finding Bitcoin blocks gets cut in half. That means if the Bitcoin price doesn't double on the day that their reward gets cut in half, they start losing significant amounts of money. Now, did Bitcoin double on the halving day? No. Bitcoin, in fact, stayed around the same price range for all summer, right? If you guys remember, Bitcoin was jumping around between 40 and 60,000 for many, many, many months. Now, if you take half of a miner's revenue, half of their money away, what's going to happen? They're going to get in a lot of deep trouble. I was going to curse, kid show. They're going to get in a lot of trouble. So what we see through every post-halving cycle in Bitcoin is a lot of businesses and a lot of miners become distressed. And what happens when these miners become distressed? They start becoming Bitcoin sellers. They're taking their treasury, they're taking every single Bitcoin they mine, and they're selling. Just for simplicity's sake, let's say every single miner pre-halving kept half of the Bitcoin that they mined and put it away for savings, and they sold half of it for expenses. Well, after the halving, if you cut it in half, you're taking away the Bitcoin that they can save, and they're just selling it all. And then they're taking the treasury that they were saving, and they're selling it all. And so usually you see distress selling post-halving, and that lasts, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, and then Bitcoin goes when it runs out of sellers. So that's for one. And the other is, I think $100,000 is a significant price for Bitcoin. I think you're going to see a lot of sell pressure there because it is such a round number. The biggest sellers in every Bitcoin bull run are profit takers. You always, and we can see this on the blockchain. We can see this with data, is you always see OGs, early folks like myself that bought Bitcoin at $10, $50, $1,000 taking profit. Am I selling? Did I sell any Bitcoin over the weekend? You guys know the answer to that. No, I didn't sell any Bitcoin, but we can look at the data and we can see that other people did. So I think it's a combination of resistance at 100,000. There's a philosophical resistance, mental resistance. There's also physical resistance in the order book. And I think that there's a lot of distressed businesses and miners out there that are living in a post-halving world that are trying to make ends meet because Bitcoin is not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars yet. That's my answer. I know it's a popular question, but that's my answer. Oh man, the questions keep pouring in. Do you expect the current 4-year cycle to have a pullback of 30% or more? I do. I do think Bitcoin is going to correct, but let me say, I think Bitcoin is going to drop more than 30% at some point in the future because I think it's going to appreciate that much. Bitcoin is volatile. Volatility is life. Listen, if you guys think about in medical, when you go to the doctor, they check your pulse, they check your heart rate. What does a healthy human look like? Looks like this. It looks volatile. It means you're alive. Volatility is life. What does a dead person look like? No volatility, no life. So I think Bitcoin remains volatile, especially to the upside, which implies also a little bit to the downside. So is 30% possible? You bet your butt it is. But that's because we're going to the moon first. That's my answer. How long after the receipt of funds to the ETF do they have to invest in the Bitcoin? Do the ETFs keep cash in reserve so they can buy on these down days? I'm not sure I understand the question. Listen, the ETFs, they don't speculate. Like BlackRock is not speculating on Bitcoin. They don't have a directional opinion. Maybe some other fund does. Maybe Larry Fink personally does. But the iBit product, they take in the capital and they're a vehicle to then buy the Bitcoin. So they don't speculate. They don't buy dips. They just take in their customers' capital and they execute the order. Does crypto follow the same market cap rule that stocks do? I don't know what that means. So I'm going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you think of these collateralized loans with Bitcoin? I think collateralized loans in Bitcoin are a huge deal. Huge deal. Why do I think that they're so cool? Because listen, Bitcoin is close to $2 trillion market cap. That is $2 trillion of new wealth, new capital that's been created for people, right? 15 years ago, Bitcoin owners and holders have made $0. 15 years later, today, Bitcoin investors, holders, owners have made $2 trillion. That's a lot of money that people have made that they want access to, but they don't want to sell the Bitcoin. How do you get access to the wealth without selling the Bitcoin? You get a loan. And that's the same thing in other assets too. How do you get access to the wealth of your home without selling your house? Let's say, for example, I wanted access to this house and its wealth, but I also need to sleep in it. What would I do? I would get a mortgage. I would get a loan. So I think Bitcoin-backed lending is huge. Now, it's volatile. So you have to be responsible. You have to be an adult. You have to do math. Do not do it irresponsibly. Make sure that it's with an institution that you trust. It's not be hypothecating. All of those normal checks and balances. But I think Bitcoin lending is massive because everyone wants to hold Bitcoin. The number one rule, Saylor said, never sell your Bitcoin. But you got to get access to the wealth because there's a lot of new wealth created and people want access to it. What do I think the top might be this cycle? Guys, you should go look at all my interviews over the summer, over the last few months. I said the same thing. I said, by the end of this year, I'm thinking around $100,000. First of all, your boy, I don't know. It's a big brain sitting inside this big head, inside of this big head of hair. It looks like we're going to hit that. So I said close to $100,000 by the end of this year. I do not think we drastically bust through $100,000 anytime super, super soon, maybe in December. But I think we're going to start to flirt with and start to pound against that resistance at $100,000. And then I said next year, 2025 is going to be a big year for Bitcoin. We're going to break 100K with authority. There's nothing but thin air up there. It's going to go into serious price discovery. And I think Bitcoin lands somewhere between 250,000 to $1 million. That's what I've said. I said it 6 months ago. Check the timestamps. And that's where I think it's going. So far, so good. I've been pretty correct. Hey, listen, I'm not going to be that guy that said, I told you so. That's not me. I wouldn't do that, but I might have told you so. I might have. I really might have. But I wouldn't say that to you guys on a live stream. I would never. Okay, next. Strike, bill pay. With bill pay, when Strike sells your Bitcoin, are the fees the same as what your account is as far as the range of the fees? English, please. But I think I know what you were asking. I think what you were asking is, are there any different fees? The answer is not yet. Right now, we haven't changed any fee structure at all. If you sell Bitcoin, that's what it is. If you buy Bitcoin, that's what it is. We may introduce like premium accounts, subscription accounts, discounted fees if you do your direct deposit. Really at Strike, we try and do super transparent, one step at a time and build with our customers. Really, the more things that we try and do at once, the more things we can get wrong. And if I've learned anything in business is you want to take guessing away. You know, no one's in the business of guessing. guessing's a really bad business, because even if you're really good at guessing, you're not close to 100% accuracy, right? And so we're going to get the product out into the market, out into your guys' hands, and just get your feedback on it. Of course, we want to make money. I got salaries to pay. You just saw Dylan on this podcast. I got to pay that guy's salary. He deserves it. But we want you to use the product, and we want it to be economically feasible for you. So I have not touched the fees yet at all. They will work just as you'd think they would, but there's room to introduce new stuff. We've definitely thought about it. So give us your feedback as you have it. I know I'm bumping up on the top of the hour, but I'm going to get through all these questions because I told you I would. So keep hanging with me. There's a decent amount of questions. And if you have new ones, write them in the chat. Lavinia will grab them, put them in this document, and we'll work through them. And I will beat Monday Night Football kickoff. I promise. Your bill pay idea. Does it hurt you when your bill gets paid during a price dip? Giving unfortunate conversions, or does it work in some intelligent way? No, of course. If Bitcoin goes down and I pay a bill, that's unfortunate. But it also helps when Bitcoin goes up and I pay a bill, because then, listen, let me tell you guys something. I think, and this isn't even I think, this is just according to math, DCAing, as much as I love it and I'm a fan of it and I really encourage people to do it, the correct financial thing to do is just to take all of your money and put it into Bitcoin. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. If Bitcoin, listen, let's say you had $10 million of cash, of US dollars, and you had it in 2009. If you were to say, I'm going to DCA my $10 million from 2009 to 2024 into Bitcoin, you would have DCA'd all the way up to the top. Do you know what the better strategy would have been? Is just take the $10 million in 2009 and just buy Bitcoin immediately with all your money. And yes, sometimes it's going to dip, but most of the time it's going to go up. And if you think you're going to time Bitcoin, you're not. You're not. You're not. And if you look at the data, most of Bitcoin's appreciation is in short time frames. Like, for example, Bitcoin just went from 60K to 90K plus in like 10 days. You either owned it or you didn't. And if you were like DCAing, you were better off just taking all the money that you were DCAing and just throwing it all into Bitcoin. So my philosophy is there's a money that only goes down. There's a money that only goes up. I'm going to own all of the money that only goes up. Why would I own any of the money that goes down? If the money that goes up, sometimes it goes down a little bit before it keeps going up. Yes. What if I pay a bill when it goes down a little bit? I don't know. Don't be a bitch. Kid show. Kid show. Grow up. Who cares? It's nothing like, let's go. What are we talking about? We're all getting debased. The media is lying to us. We gotta grab life by the kid show and own this thing. That's my speech on it. Grab life by the kid show and tear it apart. Okay. Will we be able to borrow against our Bitcoin balance on Strike? We may or may not be working on that. I'll give you guys updates later, but we may or may not be working. Listen, let me tell you guys my dream. You want to know my dream? I'll tell you my dream as a product. This is what I want. I want to be able to get my paycheck 100% in Bitcoin. So I work, I get up and contribute to this world every single day. And I want that compensation in Bitcoin. When I get a direct deposit, I want it to be to Strike, converted, and put into Bitcoin 100%. I want to be able to hold my Bitcoin on Strike so that I am not exposed to debasement. I'm not exposed to inflation. The capital that I store my life's work in, no other man can print it. I want to be able to pay my bills with Strike from my account and routing number so that I can live on my credit cards, because I love getting free wine, free flights, free access to airport lounges, free everything. So I like my credit cards. They're great. But I want to be able to pay my bills from my Bitcoin. And then lastly, I want to be able to get a loan against my Bitcoin so I don't have to sell the Bitcoin. Boom. That's what I want. Now, am I building that? You guys have to guess. But what I can tell you is that's my dream. And I'm the CEO and executive chairman of the company. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. Any plan? Will Strike ever have a web interface? Yes, we do have a web interface. and we are working on it. It is primarily for our business accounts right now, but we are probably going to enable it for consumers as well. So we do have a web interface. You can go to dashboard.strike.me and try and log in, check it out, especially if you're a business. But we will keep working on that and keep sharing. Next, business and operations. Is there a plan for you to share? Let's see. Does Strike publish their BTC holdings on the internet? Like our treasury? No. We do have a decent amount of Bitcoin. We buy Bitcoin every single month. I've said on here very publicly, Strike is a very profitable business. We take our cash flows every single month, and unless we have something to invest in, like launching in Europe or launching a new business line that we think is going to outperform Bitcoin, we just buy Bitcoin. So we buy a decent amount of Bitcoin every single day. A lot of our revenue is in Bitcoin. And then every month, we take a big pile of cash that we just made serving you guys, and we buy a bunch more Bitcoin. We are not a public company, so I only share with the world what I want to, and everything else is kept in private. So we do not share any of our numbers super publicly right now, because I just think it's in our best interest not to. But if there's a deep desire from our customers or from the public to know more about us, I'm not opposed to that. We'll see. If you guys really, really want to know how much Bitcoin we have, we may share it at some point in the future. But for now, I think that information is best kept here inside my brain. Okay, Bitcoin advice is the next section, and then there's a Jack personal section, which I'm scared to even read, but fear's never gotten in my way. We'll get to it. Lending. How much of a loan could we expect to take out against our Bitcoin in the future? If you held one Bitcoin, which is around $95,000, what could you take against it without getting margin called? That's a great question. I think LTV in this space is pretty standard. I think over collateralizing is pretty standard because of the volatility. So I would think like 150, 160% over collateralization. Okay, let me just tell you this. I think what the market needs is, I don't think Bitcoiners have an issue over collateralizing for a loan. I don't think Bitcoiners have I think you need a trusted institution that's not going to play any games, that's going to do it right and let people access their Bitcoin wealth without selling it via a loan. That's what I think the market needs. So I think a successful product's going to be over collateralized. How over collateralized? I'm not totally sure. I don't want to say any details here because it's just useless and pointless. I am working on an opinion of my own in Strike that I will share at some point in the future, but over collateralized for sure. Because listen, the goal of the product is to enable a more prosperous, better financial life for the customer. This is not to listen, the type of loan I'm talking about, I don't think we want customers taking out loans and speculating and gambling, going to the casino. It's about, wow, there's a lot of wealth appreciation in Bitcoin. People want access to that wealth. They don't want to sell the Bitcoin. And that can be done in a very responsible way. And I think that's over collateralized with a lot of transparency. So around 40%. AOC simp. That's a hell of a username. That sounds about right. Do you think I don't know the answer to that. Oh, here we go. This is interesting. I work for a major tech company, a company whose CEO has controlling shares over a board. As just a regular employee, how can I go about influencing leadership to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet? Running Strike is arguably my real only job. I had one job at a startup in Chicago before this. But I'm not familiar with corporate politics. Lord knows. I am the right guy to ask that. The best Bitcoin sales pitch is pulling up a chart, or the best Bitcoin treasury pitch is pulling up a MicroStrategy chart. So I think pulling up a chart is reasonable. And the other advice I would have in orange pilling people is just give them some. You know, once someone owns Bitcoin, whether it's gifted to them, whether they buy it, changes everything. They check the price. They naturally have an interest in its success. They don't natively just start thinking negatively about it all the time. So I would try and encourage them to buy a little bit. And if they can't buy a little bit, I would gift them a little bit. Because even over the last week, if someone had or 2 weeks, excuse me, if someone had $10 worth of Bitcoin and they looked down at their phone and all of a sudden they had $14, $15 worth of Bitcoin, they'd have been like, wait, what? What's going on? Holy cow. So owning some and looking at a chart is usually a good place to start. Since most of us young folk don't own houses, what are some good alternatives for securing a seed phrase? What? What'd you say, young folk? Listen, you should put a seed phrase in a place that you can secure. Like, where do you put other things you secure? I don't like, what about a safety deposit box? If you live a life where you have nowhere to secure something valuable, that's an entirely independent problem that we got to fix, brother. We got to fix that. You got to be able to have a life. You don't have to be a homeowner, but whether it's a safe in your house, whether it's under your mattress, whether it's in a safety deposit box, we got to have a place in your life where you can secure valuable things. If you can't live a life where you can secure valuable things, you're not taking advantage of the right to own property. So safety deposit box, a safe, you could do multi-sig with a business like Unchained. A lot of options out there, but I really hope you live a life where you can secure your stuff. Sad life if you don't. Do you think Bitcoin will dip below 60K ever again? If so, when? No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't. If you're looking to buy Bitcoin below 60K, RIP. RIP. That stands for rest in peace for those unaware. That means you're dead. I don't think Bitcoin's going below 60K. I really don't. I really don't. I think there will be dips. But here's, on a more serious note, here's some alpha. Something that I think I've noticed over the last few months, but really year, is Bitcoin dips seem to have a persistent bid behind them. They're getting bought up a lot quicker than what I've seen in the past. I think that goes to show who's in this market now. Institutions are here. And there's a persistent bid sitting under Bitcoin. So we've seen dips, but not like, let me put it to you this way. The order book is not nearly as thin as it used to be. Bitcoin used to be able to fall 40, 50% in a day. Can't happen now. The order books are too thick. There's too many people waiting to buy. There's a lot of money that's just sitting like a steamroller right behind Bitcoin that's just swallowing any weakness. So until that changes, I don't see it happening at all. At all. At all. But as soon as there's such conviction that it can't happen, that's when it does. But I really, 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 really don't think so. More Strike. Last Strike question. Do you have thoughts to take Strike public? Maybe someday. Absolutely. I've given my opinion on this, I think, last episode, but listen, Strike's buying a lot of Bitcoin. We're doing really well. We're growing a lot. And I think being public it really slows you down. It invites potential bureaucracy into the business. You'd have to have really good reasons to want to go public, really good reasons, because you're sacrificing a lot. And I'll just, because I don't want to spend 20 minutes on this, but that's the high level. And for Strike, we're able to move really quick. We're able to make really high level decisions really easily. We're able to retain a culture internally. I'm able to control who owns my company. and who does what fairly simply. Like right now at Strike, I unequivocally control everything. Do anything that we need to do to be successful and serve you guys. And going public invites some change to that. And I think a lot of companies want to go public to get better access to buy Bitcoin, but I don't know how true that actually is. I think a company should just be really focused on securing a lot of cash flows, focusing on growth, and focusing on solving the problem that they were founded to solve. And right now we're doing really well there. So I don't really want to mess that up. I think eventually we all have the aspirations as entrepreneurs to ring the bell at the NASDAQ and, take it public. And that's always like a childhood dream for people. But, I've told you guys, Saylor is in one ear, like you should go public, you should go public. Dorsey's been in the other ear, like it's really dangerous. And if you've got a good thing going, why change it? And at the end of the day, I keep waking up, and despite all these dreams and ambitions, I'm so focused on like what I got to do right now, which is continue building a great business, continue serving my customers, continue being here for Bitcoin, whether it's live streams, going on TV, doing podcasts, educating politicians, whatever it is. And that's really my focus for now. All right. Last section before Monday Night Football and this live stream wraps up is a Jack personal section that my team has. So this is interesting. I'm a little nervous to get into Jack personal. But man of the people, they say. They said that, not me. Jack, you mentioned how Andreas Antonopoulos was a close friend and mentor early in your Bitcoin journey. What's your relationship with him now? I still consider Andreas a friend. I think super highly of Andreas. I'll leave it at that. I don't know if there's like a specific angle there, but yeah, Andreas is great. And he's a friend, always will be. I think Bitcoin owes Andreas infinite amounts for his contributions to Bitcoin and through Bitcoin in the world. Is it tricky being a public figure in Bitcoin? What advice would you offer someone who might consider becoming more active in their local community? So I don't even know how to answer this. I don't even think of myself as a public figure, really, to be honest. Like, hopefully you guys can tell by the way I'm acting on this live stream. Like, be myself. It's weird reading that question because I don't even really think of myself in that way. I think of myself as a Bitcoiner. I happen to be the CEO of Strike, but I'm still a Bitcoiner and a pleb, and it's kind of how I live my life. With that being said, it's true that in some ways I am a public figure in some circumstances, and that has been challenging for sure. It's been challenging. It's something that I've had to get used to for sure. And it's just like go on the internet and seeing people opine on your life or spread lies, whether on purpose or not. That takes getting used to. But I do think that all of those challenges, those related challenges, have been really useful because it really challenges you to understand what's valuable to you, what actually matters, going from someone that cares a lot about what people say on the internet to not caring at all. That level of growth and independence and sense of agency is a really important development. So I think that there's lots of pros and cons to everyone's life. And I would say for mine in the public figure sense, it was a little interesting in the beginning, but thankful for it at this point, for sure. Jack, how do you like your steak? Medium rare type of guy? I am a medium rare type of guy. But I eat steak, however. I'd eat steak rare. I mean, obviously not well done preferred, but I like meat. I like steak. What do I think of Kendrick's new album? I think Kendrick is the hottest in the game right now. I think he's the best MC in the world at this very moment. I think what he did to Drake this summer is remarkable, arguably one of the craziest things in hip hop history. Definitely one of the craziest things I've seen in my lifetime of hip hop. And I think he's the hottest in the game right now. And that's my opinion. That shows you guys the type of rap that I value. But I think nobody is putting out bars like Kendrick at the moment. And it's hard for me to even entertain a debate on that. All right, chat. Unless you guys have any other questions, I'm 18 minutes over, and I think I'm going to wrap. So, as I always end it, these are a blast. I appreciate you guys. And please leave feedback for me and the team. So, we had our first outside guest join the live in David from Bitcoin Policy Institute. We got a little bit of an in-depth behind the scenes view of the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. So let me know how you like that. Do you guys want more guests, less guests? Do you like planned agendas? Do you like live Q&A and having it be sporadic? Do you like the time of these? So I try and do it when everyone's just getting off work, but before everyone's having dinner and watching football and getting ready for bed. So all the feedback, I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to try and keep having guests come on and having planned agendas, but I'm going to listen to you guys first because that's what matters most. So with that, just a kid from outside Chicago that gets the live stream to the world. So cool. You guys open up and tell me where you're tuning in from, and it's all over the world. So it's just about the coolest thing. I am forever grateful for your guys' support, and I'll catch you all in the comment section gathering the feedback, and I'll be live next week. Fair game? All right. Much love, ladies and gentlemen. Be easy. Talk to you guys